We can't agree whether to open the economy or keep it closed, whether to wear a mask or not, burn fossil fuels or keep them in the ground, impeach the president or anoint him king. I'm not sure we deserve to survive.
Is there any hope for finding common ground? Find out on this episode of the Growth Busters podcast.
Calling. Call the Growth Busters. Whoa, whoa, whoa.
Welcome to the Growth Busters podcast. This is the place for insightful looks at our society's addiction to growth and how we can get into a recovery program. Hi, I'm Dave Gardner, Growth Buster in Chief.
And I'm Erica Arias, co-host and co-producer of the Growth Busters podcast. For cutting-edge information about our culture's unsustainable love affair with growth and what we can do about it, visit growthbusters.org. All right, Dave, so before we dive in, what's in our inbox?
You know, the inbox has been full lately, so I get to be a little bit pickier than usual. We don't have time to share everything that we're hearing from listeners, but episode 44, just sitting around waiting for the world to end with Joshua Spodek as our special guest, that really sparked people's interest. And so we've been hearing a lot from people about that episode. So I'll share two real quick today. One is from Ellen in my own hometown of Colorado Springs. She wrote in, "Great discussion. So glad I made time for it. Important reminder to all of us the value of even the smallest action in keeping with our deepest values. Important reminder to all of us the value of even the smallest action in keeping with our deepest values matters immensely and also brings us joy." Rob Bowman's list is also comprehensive, almost overwhelming. Deep gratitude for spreading the truth. Listening to Michael Alcazar's presentation, that was actually a local environmental podcast that I help out here in Colorado Springs. This woman almost never listens to podcasts, and I've finally kind of gotten her into the mode of trying it. And so she listened to this interesting podcast about indigenous land management. Anyway, she wrote, "Listening to that presentation again, and then the podcast reminds me to make a priority of the garden and doing whatever I can to overcome the denial and delusion that most of us continue to live with. I used to quote someone who wrote something about, quote, because you can't do everything, don't refuse to do the one small thing you can do," close quote. Blessings, Ellen. Now, that quote sounded interesting, so I did a little Googling to find out exactly what the right quote was and who said it or wrote it. And it was an American author and Unitarian clergyman, Edward Everett Hale, who died in 1909. And here's the exact quote, apparently. Some confusion about it, but it looks like the version that has the most credibility is, "I am only one, but still I am one. I cannot do everything, but still I can do something. And because I cannot do everything, I will not refuse to do the something that I can do."
That is spot on with our message in that episode. Yeah, I think Josh would love that too. That's great. Thank you so much, Alan.
He listens to every episode of the Growth Busters podcast, so he's going to hear that. And I'll bet you he will write that down probably. So thanks so much, Ellen. And Jonathan, also in Colorado, emailed, "I appreciate what you are doing. I was inspired by your guest, Joshua Spodek. I will contribute to Growth Busters this coming Sunday in his honor."
Aww.
Yeah, he made a $200 donation to Growth Busters the next Sunday. And I let Joshua know, and Joshua really felt honored about that.
I love that. And I'm not surprised that we are getting so much positive feedback from that episode. I've already told Joshua how inspiring he is. I could just listen to his episodes and it's like you're having the worst day and then you just listen to him say something about sticking true to your values, which is a very simple message. I mean, we talk about that often, but there's something about the way that he speaks about that. You know that he is committed to that himself and he's not just doing the talk and not doing the walk. You know that he is very much committed to that himself, and that's inspiring.
He's like a Marine, but not a soldier, but he has that level of discipline and commitment to living his principles, living simply. And, you know, he's willing to drop in on Growth Busters episodes frequently. We just have to figure out a way to be organized enough to pull that off. But anyway, the fact that Jonathan in Colorado actually made a $200 donation, it reminded me that we really don't mention it often enough. We really don't like to beg, but it's probably good to remind our listeners that the Growth Busters Project is a scrappy little nonprofit project, and it runs on donation revenue. So if you appreciate what we're doing, if you think it's important, maybe even vital, head over to growthbusters.org, click on the donate button. We work for tips.
Well, thanks so much to our listeners for writing into us and for supporting the Growth Busters podcast. We love hearing from you. Don't forget to send us your questions and any comments to podcast@growthbusters.org.
Okay, let's get to the main event. If there ever was a time that we need to figure out how to get opposite sides to see eye to eye and cooperate to solve our biggest challenges, that time is now. Well, Seattle authors Kevin Wilhelm and Natalie Hoffman are joining us in this episode to discuss concepts from their new book, How to Talk to the Other Side, Finding Common Ground in the Time of Coronavirus, Recession, and Climate Change. So the timing couldn't be better. Kevin and Natalie, thanks so much for joining us. Quick word about each of you. Kevin is a thought leader on how to bring people from different viewpoints and ideologies together to solve big challenges, CEO and a professor. He's worked with over 150 organizations, including New York Life, Nordstrom, Alaska Airlines, REI, as well as cities, counties, and government agencies. He's also an instructor at University of Washington and author of 4 books, including the acclaimed Return on Sustainability, How Business Can Increase Profitability and Address Climate Change in an Uncertain Economy. Definitely got some special experience in the sustainability arena, so this should be a good conversation. And Natalie Hoffman, she specializes in research and communication between differing cultures and points of view. And her experiences as a young mixed-race woman inform her perspective. So she's a champion for empathy, kindness, respect, and appreciation, all of which I'm in the remedial program for all those. Passionate about sustainability and unity, Hoffman earned her degree in climate science and policy and Japanese language and culture. She's taught cross-cultural translation to a range of people from university students to environmental activists. You are our people. We're your people, so this should be a lot of fun. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Erica, I've hardly let you get a word in edgewise. Maybe I should let you start the conversation.
I guess I kind of want to start. We read a little bit of some highlights of your book. Why don't you guys start with kind of just giving us some background on maybe the difference between a climate skeptic versus a climate advocate?
Sure. So basically, the idea around the book was that at this time, this hyper-partisan time where people are mass siloed in terms of how they think, how they listen in social media, the news they follow, and the ideas they generate have only been really magnified kind of during this coronavirus pandemic as you're getting the mindset shift about what's more important about public health, reopening the economy, things like climate change, which are longer term perspectives get pushed out. And so we wanted to break it out into 6 different kind of chapters. The one that you just mentioned, Eric, about, climate advocates and skeptics. And we don't use the term denier. We use skeptic because denier is kind of a trigger word. But really what we wanted to say is climate advocates are those who believe that, climate change is real, it's happening, we need to take action. Climate skeptics may be people who, they don't necessarily 100% deny that it's happening, but they may be skeptical about certain aspects of it, or that they certainly think that there's higher priorities. And so as we were talking through this, kind of chapter within the book and how to talk to people on either side of this, we first reached out, we talked to people, we listened to people, we kind of got where their mindset was coming from. And we settled on kind of those 2 descriptions, because I think for so often, if you even just mention climate change, someone immediately goes to Republican, Democrat, or, believer or non-believer, I believe in science or not. And then they stereotype about your entire value system. And so we wanted to kind of be clear and unpack it in a more orderly way that you could actually have a conversation.
Got it.
Man, I'd really like to think that the debate is over and that there aren't that many skeptics out there, but you're probably finding that that's not the case, huh?
Well, what I would say is there's few climate deniers out there, but there's certainly plenty of people that we put in the kind of skeptical stage because, so often in the media puts out, if there's a flood, a hurricane, a forest fire, there's an immediate link to climate change. And the person on the other end just kind of says, don't necessarily tie it to this one. But when you look at a more systemic approach of what's happening in the planet and the fact that 18 of the last 19 years we've had the warmest on record. The Arctic is, at its warmest peak that it's ever been. Alaska hit 80 degrees. So the evidence is quite clear from a scientific perspective, but yet skeptics still have things they're holding on to as to why they may not fully embrace activity on climate change. And it might be because of how it might impact their business, their way of life, the car that they drive, how they conduct themselves as individuals. And so they're not fully willing to be 100% on board because they still have reservations.
When you're talking about just the people in general, have you conducted focus groups or these informal interviews or survey research? What is the data that you've collected based on?
Sure. So we've conducted a lot of interviews ourselves, just people that we know and people that we don't know as well. And we've also done a lot of research, so survey research is part of this. One of the interesting research articles that we found is that the climate argument is actually far more generational than it is political. So we mentioned this in a couple of our chapters, but
very interesting, yeah.
Yeah, and actually people who are aged 18 to 38 are virtually the same on how many of them believe in climate change or think that it's important on both Republican and Democrat, conservative and liberal sides. And it's a lot more of a generational gap. So it's a lot of research kind of like that we've conducted.
Great.
And I think Natalie brings up a great point that actually the research shows that young conservatives are actually more in terms of believers in climate change than young liberals. And so that's something that I think probably most people would not assume or expect. And we think it's an important message because I think, again, in this hyper-partisan, politicized climate, people have moved into kind of there's two different camps. And the reality is that for millennials and Gen Z, recycling, Wi-Fi, smartphones, and climate change, they know it's happening.
I think this is a really great subject for us to use as our case study as we grill you to get good advice about how to communicate about it. Because even though the debate is largely over, I think we're kind of on to the next debate, which is, well, how much are we willing to restrict economic growth in order to fight climate change or something like that? There's still going to be some significant differences of opinion, maybe along partisan lines a lot of the time. But, here at Growthbusters, our history has been to try to illuminate the fact that you cannot grow the economy perpetually on a finite planet. Economic growth is really not the final answer. And of course, I don't know, probably 99.9% of the people on the planet Earth think that economic growth is the holy grail. So Erica and I are probably constantly going to be running into people that we need to somehow find some common ground with. So we're really anxious to see if you can give us some good tricks.
Well, you don't need tricks. And that's one of the things that we really talk about in terms of this book. And actually, we lay it out in really stark, data-driven points. And
darn, I want tricks.
Okay, here's a trick that I use in my business. And again, we've worked with over 165 different organizations. I've probably given talks to over 50,000 people over the last 10 years on this. The companies that have taken proactive action on climate change, environmental and social issues actually outperform those that don't from a financial perspective of about 5.6% on an annual ROI basis. And as a market cap basis, so let's just go pure economics, you could be talking to a right-wing conservative who is in the Thomas Friedman, all we care about is maximizing shareholder value and growing the economy. Basically, the data, and we put this in our book, the Dow Jones Sustainability Index and the S&P 500 Social and Environmental Index outperform their traditional indices, not only before the financial crisis 2008, but after, in this run-up of growth that we've had over the last 10 years, the record market that we've had over the last 3 years, and Natalie did the research on this, even the last 2 months since the coronavirus has hit and the economy is cratered, companies that have taken proactive action in these two areas are outperforming traditional companies. And then just to also give you some hope, Dave, on this, you said 99.9, but today New Zealand ditched GDP in favor of growth, national happiness. This follows Bhutan, which was the first country to do that. And Ecuador has assigned ecological rights on par with economic for the rainforest of Ecuador. And even the Great Lakes have now put the actual economic and ecological impacts of the Great Lakes on equal footing. there's a chance on that. And I'll let Natalie weigh in because she was the one who did a lot of the research in this regard.
Thanks for that ray of sunshine, by the way.
He's great at that. Yeah, some more interesting points of information that kind of back this up is that right now in the coronavirus, it's pretty easy to see how companies care more about maximizing shareholder value, because even on a non-environmental front, think about how Zoom, for example, made their services free for K through 12 schools, or how many companies shifted their operations to produce ventilators or masks, or how some companies pledge not to disconnect or make their customers pay who are impacted by the coronavirus. And so clearly companies see the value in caring more than just financial benefit. And actually, I mentioned the generational piece a little bit earlier, but actually around 90% of young professionals factor in a company's social environmental criteria when they make their decision about what job to go to. And so we're finding more and more that CEOs are realizing, yeah, ESG actually does impact how my company does. And even surveys of CEOs, 90% of them have said, yes, environmental social governance needs to be included in operations and also in supply chain in order for my business to be successful.
So back to the just kind of the hard knocks advice that you might be able to offer when you are communicating with someone where there's some fundamental disagreement. What are the biggest mistakes that you find people make?
The biggest one is that one, people start out with the mindset that they need to convince the other person that they're right and that they're wrong. And they believe that you hit them with enough facts, enough data, and enough stories, that'll change their mind. It doesn't work at all. And the second one is to realize that people make their kind of decisions based on emotion and not reason. And so, whether it's climate change, environmental issues, political voting, you found that people act outside of their own self-interest a lot of the time, but it's purely based off an emotion and not reason. And I think that one of the things that we go to great lengths in this book is to start out with, where do you find common ground with individuals right up front? How do you, make connections with individuals? How do you, find a way that you connect on a human level first before you try and move to a more difficult area? And then we also tell people that to not try and convince them that climate change is happening or not. We have case studies in here where we've got, companies where the CEO and the next in line completely disagree whether climate change is happening or not. But there's an agricultural company, they understand that water and the quality of their soil are paramount to their survival of the business and their ROI. And so we don't even mention climate when we engage with them as a company and sustainable business consulting. What we do is we talk to them about water and soil and how that's going to impact their harvest, their economics, their ability to hire people, their ability to grow financially. And they engage on that. Whereas if the CEO is a climate skeptic, he's not going to go there.
Yeah, and one of the things that we talk about as well is that we actually have a lot of the same foundational interests and values at heart. We have the same ends of where we want to be: a healthy family, financial success, safe community, but then we disagree on the means of getting there. And so if we can start out talking to somebody about things that we have in common and also those foundational things of where we want to be, and we can agree first, then you start out with having respect for each other, and then you can go into a discussion about the means instead of just kind of screaming at each other like cats and dogs from the beginning about what you disagree on the most.
Thank you for saying that, Natalie. I think that finding common ground really is the future for whatever it is that you're trying to achieve. Building coalitions and connections with people and realizing at the end of the day, we all want the same thing. I think it's in everybody's best interest that we don't want humanity to go extinct. If we really want to look at the very core basic value, and that is life. We all want to survive. We all want to have a good life. And we care about our families. And I think if we can focus on that, then you are right. We do have to then think about how to get there. But I guess really kind of where I am a little confused and might need a little bit more clarification is, when I think about getting there and what is the best way, the most effective way of getting there, that's kind of where someone like me would go to facts and science. That's kind of where I don't want to let go of that stuff, because how do we state our case and get the people in charge, policymakers who have that power to really create change? How do we get them to listen to our argument without the science and the facts, right? And I think this is an excellent strategy to start, but I think we can't just forget about all the facts.
So you'll find that if you do start with listening to people's true, deeper fears and anxieties, then from that area you can find out what are their actual needs. What are they so afraid of, and what do they need in their life? And then once you can understand that, then it's okay to use your facts and your knowledge. That's great that you have that. So you can use that from your perspective, and while understanding their perspective, to find that common ground solution, that win-win. Our book is just chock full of win-win solutions that are actually really available and way, way more common than you might expect.
And Erica, I would just say that you're seeing this play out in live time at every state capitol and everything opening right now. You want to hit on climate change about science and facts? Look at what's happening with COVID-19. The science, the facts are out there. What are people doing? They're opening, they're taking their masks off, they're mass congregating, we're reopening the economy. To them, the science and facts don't matter. And it's no different on climate change, because there's an emotional component to them that's saying there's something else that's a little more important. So we don't say that the science and facts don't matter, because they absolutely do. And that's what drives this. We found is that when someone says, well, the science is unproven on climate change, it's a talking point they've heard 1,000 times. Now, it's true. Talk to a scientist, they'll say there's only 99.97% certainty, but they're never willing to say it's 100% certainty. You know, what my technique is, they go, you know what else hasn't been proven? Gravity. Gravity's not been proven, but I'm pretty sure. And usually when they say that they don't believe in science, when you come up to them and go, okay, you don't believe in science, how does this work? How are you actually making a phone call or using data? How do you use your remote control? How do you stream Netflix? There's science involved. They do believe in science, they believe in medicine, but they don't believe in what you're talking about. And so that's the issue, is that for so long, environmentalists have been like, you need to believe what we're saying. And the reality is, what Natalie was saying is, by first seeking to understand, and then you can be understood. But so often people have been leading with it. And it's like the Pacific Northwest salmon. People know they need to eat wild salmon instead of farm salmon. When you get a scientist talking about it, they talk about pH levels and acidity and all these different things. When you just say, this tastes better, everyone can get that. This is healthier for you. Oh, I get that. If you eat only farm salmon, may not have salmon. They get that. But when you hit them with all the science and the data and the facts, it doesn't go through, because, again, they're not dealing with reason. They're dealing with emotion, and emotion is in the heart.
I tend to look at things in phases. So it's like phase 1, we appeal to emotion. Phase 2, we can focus on education. And I think education is key here. That's really where I appreciate you clarifying this, Kevin and Natalie, because I don't want to assume that people don't know any better, but sometimes I really do worry if they're only motivated by emotion. And I spend a lot of time thinking about what people's motives are and, you know, psychological mechanisms for doing what they do, because you can imagine opening up when it's really not safe to do so, when there is no plan. It'll drive all of us crazy if we allow it to. But education is key, because, you know, at the same time, we don't want to force a one-sided position down anybody's throat, but we still want to give them what they need to make informed decisions for themselves, right? And that doesn't necessarily have to mean like, I'm going to fight my way to get you there, but I'm going to give you all that you need, education, in a creative way, in a non-coercive way, so that you can make an informed decision.
And you're right, and you wish that that would be the case. But why was everybody in the Lake of the Ozarks in that pool? Why were all those things happening in the pool this weekend? People know better. And you're right, it is a phased approach. You have to first seek to understand, and you got to listen to them authentically. And as Natalie was saying, you got to parse out what's really true to the core of what they're believing and why they're doing it. And that takes hard work. It's really hard to listen to someone that you completely disagree with and you may find counter to all of your values. But you need to do that. And then you need to find that common ground, that shared humanity, the level of respect. And we found, you know, some people learn by fact, some people learn by storytelling. And so we use a combination. And storytelling, a lot of times, what we show throughout the book are a number of win-win examples where a person can completely disagree, but they can still move forward on things. I mean, think of, we've worked with 165 different companies. Not one of them has ever taken our advice of going all work from home to reduce carbon emissions and to stop business travel. Now, everyone said that'll never happen. It can't do it. No way. It's going to destroy our business. Now, every single company in the country is doing it. And so it was not about, necessarily about science facts, but it's just like all of a sudden it's like, oh, okay, we can do this. It makes sense. We better do this. But you first have to build that trust to get there.
Okay, here's a question for extra credit. What do you think the people that were at that pool party at Lake of the Ozarks, what was it? What was their emotional drive that made them do that? Because we don't have the luxury of being able to sit down with them and find common ground one-on-one, but obviously there are other ways to, we can't do a survey, but you probably saw some interviews with some of them and have a theory about that, I bet.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, at the root of a lot of the socializing that is going on is that desire to have contact with other humans, something that we're not used to missing and something that maybe we've all taken for granted in the past. And so, let's say, and this is totally hypothetical, but if people need to socialize, can we find that solution that meets their need of socializing in a different manner? That's the kind of common ground solution that we say look for. So rather than saying, wow, you're a horrible person, I can't believe you did that, do you have no sense? We instead go towards the solution and say, how can we better help you get what you need without putting other people at risk?
Since this is for extra credit, I'll take it one further, Dave. What were they thinking? They were thinking, I'm young, I'm invincible, this isn't going to hit me, and I want to socialize. It's very similar to what Erica was asking on the previous question about climate change. Why don't people take action on climate change? It's a long-term problem. It's not affecting me personally. Now, when they start seeing people get sick, there'll be a change of heart. In the same way that, 10 years ago, when there was those lead paint that was found in those toys from China, and every parent in the country threw out those toys overnight, it was because it was personal. It would impact them directly. They could see it. They could touch it. It's kind of one of those things that if there was some way that for any of those people, if there was one person who was like glowing red with scabs all over them and, they would go, oh God, I don't want to be in the water with them. We don't have that. And so it's the same way with climate. It's like,
sorry to interrupt, but it's kind of depressing knowing that people are not affected until it affects them directly. And then, meanwhile, you're trying to find common ground, which essentially risking it getting to that point, right? Now people will get sick.
Yeah, but just think of it when you drive down the road and you see a bumper sticker that says, every day an acre of farmland is lost. Most people read it and they go, that sucks, and they just kind of move on with their day. Or no one really cares about saving, the endangered, subspecies of gazelle in Africa till they go and they see it and they go, what a beautiful animal, because they see them in zoos and are like, must be fine. So it's just human nature. And I think that where we have hope in what Dave is saying is that on an issue like climate change, is that for the younger generation, for anybody that was born, from say 1986 onward, they get it. There isn't a divide. They're not saying, oh, the science isn't unproven on this. They know and they have expectations and they're demanding of it. What's happened is the media and the mass stylization of things that are, super mass targeting that comes through Facebook and some of our other, social media apps has blown it out of proportion because the powers that be see it as that.
So they're being manipulated.
Facebook yesterday was found on that. The internal memo that came out and said, we drive more revenue and people spend more time on Facebook, the more divisive the content. And when it was shown that, say, 40% of the negative content was being, thrown on there by bots and not by humans, they're doing it because there's money to be made and they want to do that. And that's the kind of thing that needs to be exposed as to what's behind it.
So one of the biggest things I wanted to ask you, you wrote in the book, use hope instead of fear. You wrote, fearful or negative messaging isn't successful on either side. And that advice is pretty common, but At the same time, we also hear that people are more motivated to avoid a loss than they are to gain something. So that almost seems like a contradiction. So I'm glad to have a couple experts in the room, and I'm hoping you can help me sort through that.
Yeah, so I've actually studied psychology of sustainable behavior, and there have been many psychological studies about this very topic, and most of them say that fearful messaging is just not effective in the long term. So if you see a commercial of a bunch of polar bears falling dead on the ground, raining from the sky, that's not going to really make you want to change your behavior, especially in the long term. But let's say that you find empathy and hope in a more positive message. Maybe it won't get that initial kind of knee-jerk reaction that the other one gets, but it will make you care about it more.
You know, I don't know. I'm not buying it. You're going to have to find some common ground with me here.
Okay, Dave, I've got your common ground. I'll raise you one. Okay, so when you were taking driver's ed, they showed scary movies about all these things. Don't drive this certain way, and drink, drive, rationalize, and all the movies that you probably remember when you were 16. And by the time Erica and Natalie came around, they didn't have those. They had positive ways to show people how to do things because they found that the scare tactics didn't work.
But we're better drivers than them.
What about the DARE program?
Yeah, exactly.
I consider that less of a scare tactic. Actually, what my mother did was more of a scare tactic, and that worked on me. She would show me pictures of addicts and said, if you did drugs, this is what you're going to look like. And I said, oh, no, I don't want to lose my teeth. And that actually worked on me. But the DARE program, I mean, there's a cute dog that came into school, and that was actually a very positive thing that ended up not working out at all. More kids actually ended up using drugs after that.
Well, it had more to do with just one federal program in that regard.
Right.
But coming back to Dave, as to your point about the scare tactics work, I mean, that's one of the reasons why we started the book, and then when we rewrote it to really focus it on the here and now of what you're seeing with the economy, what you're seeing with the pandemic and climate change, is that, if the scare tactics would work about, people dying from this, you wouldn't see people with armed guns, showing up at Capitol saying, I don't care, I'm going to get a haircut today. And, because what's scaring to them and what is that their emotion is tying to something else than the health reason. And it's the same thing with the economy. I think one of the issues that's kind of interesting is that we've had a horrible, absolutely disastrous economy, and yet the stock market has rebounded. And if you ask most of your people, they're like, I'm actually going to stay in my 401ks, where in 2008, everyone's pulling everything out. And so there's kind of a lot of psychology at play. And what may work with one person, I think that's the thing, is when they talk about kind of scare tactics versus positive, every individual is different. Just think of your own family, and what works with your brother or sister sometimes doesn't work with you, what mom and dad tried. And so, scare tactic worked maybe perfectly with Erica, with the 5 friends that I grew up with in Ohio. No, it didn't work for them at all, but other things did in different regards. So.
Right. And I say that understanding that one does not define all. It's some people are the outliers, and I guess that was me. Yeah, I think one thing that stood out was focus on the financial bottom line to lower the ideological temperature. Don't talk science, morals, or ideology. Talk money. Now, this is all good and done, except it concerns me a little bit because it assumes the existing capitalist system, which I think is the root cause of our ecological calamity. Am I wrong?
No, it definitely is there. In my experience dealing with senior executives of Fortune 500 companies, small businesses, nonprofits, and certainly government officials, when, we've testified on things on climate change, down even in a very left-leaning state like the state of Washington, when the argument was made about, hey, the state needs to take action on climate change, we talked about it from a public health perspective, from an environmental perspective, from a labor perspective, from a social justice, from an equity perspective. All those arguments were made. And then what was the counter argument? Yeah, well, I heard that my business in Port Orchard is going to go out of business if we have to do this climate tax, so we're not going to do it. So what we had to do was come up with, hey, here are a whole bunch of business solutions and ways that people can make money through, taking action on climate change. So whether you are for or against it, you can do better, not only financially, but better from a risk perspective, from a brand perspective, from a attraction and retention of employees. competitive advantage in the marketplace. So yeah, we're certainly not capitalist mongers, but what we found is that a lot of the people in power are. And when you talk to a senator or Republican or a senator who's a Democrat about something that will save their district money, they'll listen. If you talk to a business and say, hey, I found a way that can help you make money or save money, they'll listen. And so that just kind of drops it out. And certainly right now, when you're seeing companies making massive layoffs, whole industries going away. Air travel's down 98%. Hertz rental car, the number one rental car in the world, gone. Just today, Bath and Body Works, gone. And Boeing laying off 10,000 workers. So everyone is focused on, I can't keep my business going and hire people and do the right thing if I don't have money. And if you can solve that issue first, kind of that Maslow, hierarchy of needs, the other political, religious, ideological stuff kind of can melt away.
Yeah, and if the moral argument was effective enough to work, then we wouldn't be in the situation that we are right now. And so we have to take tactics that are more effective. And we make the argument that, if you believe or you don't believe in climate change or saving the environment, for a lot of the solutions, it doesn't even matter because it's just better for you. It's in your best interest to do these sustainable solutions.
Yeah, and Erica, we are 100% on your side on this. And I can tell you that having watched and advised 25 colleges, where the student groups came in and said, we need to divest from fossil fuels. And they all made the environmental argument and they made the moral argument. And one of our campuses here in Seattle University, a Jesuit institution, people went to the highest bodies of the school and said, this is a social justice. This is a moral issue. This is in the Bible. And what did they hear? Now we can't really do that because, the chief financial officer, the chief endowment officer, their role is to make sure that endowment grows so they can have more money for more buildings, more scholarships, more students on campus. So when we went and advised them and said, show them the path. Hey, they can divest from fossil fuels because it's only out of these 89 companies. Here are these social responsible investment funds that outperform these other ones. Tell them how, as an endowment or investment officer, they can have more money to give out in scholarships and buildings and actually look better to their bosses. They listened. The moral argument went nowhere. And now schools are making the shift, and that same school we did made the shift. And it might have been they did it for moral reason, but they also see the writing on the wall when, oil stocks and the price of oil goes to negative $35 a barrel and 300 plus coal companies go out of business. They realize these aren't the right things to have in my portfolio.
Very well argued. Yeah, it's a cruel world out there, Erica.
It really is.
Money still talks.
I'm not 100% sold. Looking at it as, I don't want to say a short-term solution, but that is what's coming to mind. And gosh, I'm kind of the perfect person to talk to because, we are trying to find common ground with me. But I kind of see it as sort of a short-term solution because I don't really want it to be a long-term solution. My fear is that if it's a long-term solution, then if we're giving these corporations more strategies to win other people over, then nothing is really going to change systemically, right? And that means capitalism continues on and...
they did not write the book, How to Start the Revolution.
Well, I'm just saying.
Well, don't worry. We are also full of long-term solutions, like we should listen to each other and we should learn how to talk to each other again, which is the basis of our book. And these are things that if we want to make forward progress right now or in 100 years, we're going to have to learn how to do. And there were times in the past where we were better at it and maybe had more progress, seeing eye to eye in Congress and et cetera. And so that's something that, even if money is not going to be the big topic, the money is our example. Don't get it wrong. Money is just one of the many examples that we use of what we can find common ground in America right now. But our solutions kind of lead you to find your own examples. It's not an end-all be-all. It's more of a guide.
Got it. Okay. So it's not like focus on the money for every example, because that's very easy to do.
It is easy to do. What we found is that, and this is from 15 plus years of experience working with organizations, with 100 organizations, there were probably 25 that wanted to address climate change because it was the right thing to do, and they felt like they had to take action. There were probably 20 to 25 who were taking action because they know their employees are demanding it, their new talent is demanding it. At least half are doing it because a customer or an investor has said, do this or you're going to lose X dollars. right now, in this global pandemic that we're dealing with, the companies that were taking action because it was the right thing to do, a few of them are staying on track. The ones that are staying on track are the ones that are worried about losing $50 million in business if they don't do something on climate change. And so we're not saying that it needs to be the leader on it, but when you get an organization like the CDP or the Carbon Disclosure Project that's asking, the top 5,000 companies in the world, what are you doing on this activity? And it's rating them, and it's being used as a de facto standard by Walmart and Amazon and other companies around the globe. The number of companies that make up these investments are larger than the GDP of the United States, China, the EU, England, Russia, Japan combined. And so they're moving things in a way that is not happening through the United Nations, is not happening through the global compacts that they've signed, like the Paris Climate Accords. And so we're not saying it's the why to do it, but we're saying, who cares? We need to address climate change. We don't care if they believe in it or not. Just start taking action. If you're doing it because it's a moral reason, great. If you're doing it because you believe the science, great. If you're doing it just because you want to save money, great. The people that are doing it just because they want to make or save money, let's not also have to change them from a Buddhist to a Muslim or a Hindu to a Jew or a Christian to an atheist. You just got to go, let's get there.
Well, we're running short on time, and Erica, time is money. So I think we're going to need to wrap this up. Kevin and Natalie, you'll be forgiven if you want to jump off, but we would love for you to stick around for our closing segment, Honey, I Shrunk My Footprint. Are you in?
Yay!
Oh, great. Are you ready for that, Erica?
Yes.
Okay, so Honey, I Shrunk My Footprint. It's a segment that we've just recently resurrected where we share something interesting in our own life that we're doing to lighten our load on the planet. And, sometimes it's quirky, sometimes it's really way off the charts obsessive compulsive. Sometimes it just makes perfect sense. So anything goes.
We want to hear you guys first, and then we'll add on. I want to hear Erica first.
Okay, on the spot. All right. So, I've been stuck in the house for 2 months, for the most part. I've been having a little bit of a T-zone breakout area without sounding like too much of a girl. So normally I would go to the store and buy an exfoliant. But you know what? No, I said I'm not going to go. I'm not going to buy more stuff. I'm just going to take care of this at home. And I made my own exfoliant out of none other than some baking soda and my special Dr. Bronner soap. Just rub that together like so and rub it on the face, and I'm free of breakouts. So yeah, if you need a tip like that, that's my tip for you. Yeah, that's what I have for this week. Nothing major, but facial care is important.
Pretty impressive. And you didn't burn any gasoline on the way to the store?
Not at all, no.
All right, well, mine is kind of COVID shutdown related also. Erica knows that I have been on I'm about 3 years into this project to stay out of the car as much as possible and get on my bicycle whenever I need to go somewhere. Well, kind of frustrating that there haven't been too many places to go. And for some reason, I don't want to just get on my bike and ride around for exercise. I need to have some place to go. And the gym's closed, so can't even ride the bike to the gym. So it's been a little frustrating, but I think it's interesting that I wanted to share that I am delighted when I come up with some good reason to get on the bike. It excites me. I really enjoy it. And, who's ever delighted, when they have to get in the car and drive somewhere? There's nothing delightful about that unless you happen to own a Maserati, maybe. So my solution has been to come up with interesting places to go. So I really don't need to go anywhere. So I pack a lunch and I get on the bike and I ride to a park to have a picnic, sit on the grass, and then ride the bike back home. And that works.
Dave, that's adorable.
Well, it's working for me, so I'm just... Yeah.
I love it.
I did that the other day to jump in the freezing cold Lake Washington.
Ooh,
so.
Tell us more.
Oh, I think that's all you need to know about that one. I can go next. So this idea has kind of started from when I was back in college. So a couple of the coolest people I know challenged me to keep all the trash that I created in a mason jar for 10 days. And so every piece of trash that I made, I had to stick it in the mason jar and try and make it fit. And that one only lasted me 10 days. A couple of them are actually still doing that long term. But what I learned was that you can become a lot more intentional about the things that you throw out and kind of understand that when you purchase things that it's going to produce trash. And so that actually is just leading to the one that I'm doing right now, which is I have put a recycle bin and a compost in my room, additional to the ones that are kind of downstairs in the kitchen in my house. And so I find that a lot of the trash I make is actually just me being too lazy to go downstairs and put it in the recycle bin. And so I just throw it in the trash in my room. But if there's a recycle bin there, then it's a whole lot easier.
Good solution. I was afraid you were going to tell us you found out where to order 10-gallon jars.
That's right. I just lug around a 50-pound jar all day. That would be good exercise.
That's a good one. Kevin, what have you got for us?
Well, unlike other book tours, I'm doing it all virtually, and it's just purely from a moral and environmental perspective. It has nothing to do with the pandemic whatsoever. No, sorry, that was just for Erica. What I've been doing, I have a 5-year-old, and I, trying to balance like work, life, homeschool, like so many parents, I would go swim, and that was like the way I exercise. And obviously with every pool being closed, I had to figure out another way to do it. So I now do my own version of CrossFit that I call Kirby CrossFit. My son's name is Kirby. He's 5. He's a little bowl of energy, but he now is being willing to use to be my kettlebell and working out with me. So I actually use him as kind of my bench press for core techniques because he, runs all around. But it's been an effective way to get back in shape. I know, Erica, you don't want me to save money on gym memberships.
I've been doing yoga sculpt at home.
Yeah. But basically, it's been my new way of trying to, take what was homeschooling and doing things of, nature. So if I'm doing quote unquote, leg squats with him, we're counting in Spanish and then we count in Korean. If I'm going to use him as a kettlebell and throw him up towards a tree, he has to grab the tree, but he has to name the type of tree and what type of leaves comes out of it. And then he has to look at the grass. So trying to combine kind of education and exercise and sustainability all in one. But that's been my little life hack. Now he's getting to be 50 pounds. So I have to really get strong very quickly over these next 2 months. So Erica, if we ever meet in person, if I'm not a ripped Greek god, then you'll know I failed miserably.
That's when I'll turn you to yoga sculpt. Yep, that's been working for me. I could probably easily carry 50.
Yeah. I would say the other life hack you all should know about is that if you buy 7th generation laundry detergent, because we're all doing way more laundry than we ever have because we're stuck at home and we're bored, you can run everything on cold. And that is actually the biggest impact that you can have with your chemicals and laundry detergent. By running on cold, you're actually reducing a lot of natural gas demand on your water heater. And so that's just a way that I'm lowering the footprint during this time of coronavirus.
Appreciate you doing that. And same thing, we've got 7th generation in the house here too, because it was really the best rated for getting your clothes clean in cold water. So here. Well, Kevin Wilhelm and Natalie Hoffman, authors of How to Talk to the Other Side, Finding Common Ground in the Time of Coronavirus, Recession, and Climate Change. Boy, how did you guys know that was the title you needed to give that book? Hot off the presses.
We thought of it like 4 years ago.
Right.
Thank you both for having us. This was really fun. And we got to say, you two are awesome at this. And we really enjoyed it. And have us back again, in a couple months. We can see how things came out. And Erica will be much nicer to you and we will be much tougher on Dave.
I deserve it.
Thank you so much for coming to the show, guys. Definitely keep us posted on your podcast and stay healthy.
Thank you. It's been our pleasure.
Well, this brings us to the end of another exciting episode of the Growthbusters podcast. Don't forget to explore the issues at growthbusters.org. And thanks again to Kevin Wilhelm and Natalie Hoffman, and to you, Erica, for investing your time today. You, the listeners, if you think this podcast is important, subscribe to the podcast on your podcast app and recommend it to your friends.
As always, you can find us at growthbusters.org and search for Growthbusters Podcast on Facebook, Spotify, and on your Alexa smart speaker. I'm Erica Arias, reminding you that friends don't let friends miss the real story on sustainable living. Thanks so much for listening.
We need to let everybody go, so thank you to all of our listeners for offering your support, for your donations, for listening, for recommending the podcast to your friends, and for allowing us to do this meaningful work.
Some may dream to pave mountains and streams, but not me. I'm a growth buster. Some they just want more, but don't know what it's for, but not me. I'm a growth buster. Don't want a solution at the cost of pollution. They think bigger is better at the cost of the weather. But no, not us. We are the growth busters. Calling, 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 calling. Call the growth busters. Whoa.